So my name is Danilo Correale, and I'm presenting They Will Say I Killed Them, which is a film project I have been working on for about 2 years, if no more, and it's the result of a long research on post-fascist cinema and the entertainment industry in Italy until the 1984. So what I really tried to do through this film, which is basically the attempt to rebuild the history of unmade cinema, is to create like a counter narrative. We are living in a very charged like political time, and often we are kind of immersed like into a sense of toxicity that it's not only felt like into the political life, but is also very present into the all-around industry of entertainment. So when I started to think about this project as this sort of research on movies that have never been made, I started to focus on 6 fundamental subjects that I always felt were not developed enough, unfolded enough, especially in Italian culture, because I'm Italian, and but it doesn't refer only to that. I think it's a much more larger narrative. But the 6 subjects were related to the question of colonialism, homosexuality, feminism, terrorism, and resistance and religion. So there are 6 subjects that, of course, like they've been part of like our grand narrative of like the mid 20th century. When I started to work on this project, I felt like a big responsibility, because of course I was like just like a scavenging like into these very chaotic archives where things are not really archived as they should have been, and I was finding like this screenplay fundamentally, and the screenplays were these places where like these directors were putting like all these ideas about like how to finally like say something about the subject that has never been unfolded and never been developed. But then eventually like they encounter an issue, like all these screenplays were found like in these Italian archives because fundamentally they were censored. I mean, we're not talking about like the classic like cinematic idea of censorship. I mean, that kind of censorship does not exist anymore, probably like since like the 70s. I mean, of course, like there is still some kind of censorship, but like in Western countries, the censorship act in a completely different way. I mean, I call it, and there are like studies about like this idea of indirect censorship. Indirect censorship, it's nothing else than just like cut the funding, for example, like for a film, or like try to block like a production that is going like too much like into a certain direction, but not by blocking it, just by changing a little bit, like changing the actors, changing the scene. And of course, like the economy of the entertainment is really creating like the cinematic products that we see in the theater nowadays. So after 2 years of research, I defined like this 6 subject, and what I tried to do was to kind of restage some of the scene that are drafted into the screenplays, like trying to collect information from different sources. Some of the screenplays had notes about like the potential aesthetic, the formal signifiers of the film, and I really literally work as an archaeologist, or more like a biologist that tried like to recombine DNA of some creature without having bits of information. There was another fundamental issue inside the whole project, which was how do I create like a meta-narrative of these that can connect these 6 different projects together that are apparently like very separated in terms of language, in terms of aesthetic, in terms of subject. So the language of each section are completely different. We go from like a TV style kind of narrative, then there is a very theatrical part, like a thriller, we have the horror. It kind of gives like this kaleidoscope of what cinema is, not only in Italy but everywhere. And then I had like this issue of like gluing things together, so I started to basically draft a dramaturgy that was inspired by this idea of an archivist that is kind of lost into the labyrinth. And the labyrinth is this archive. And this archive and the entire labyrinth is somehow present in the exhibition. So when you walk into the exhibition, you see basically this sort of like a mirror of the screen. It's a sort of like a meta narrative, meta space that kind of provide the audience this three-dimensional experience in which like you are at the same time like inside the film and but you're also watching at the film, watching at the structure, the set that is activated by your presence. And I think that's a very important aspect of like this four-dimensional cinema that kind of brings like the audience like more into the act. And of course the museum is not a theater, and artists that show like inside the museum like a cinematic projects, they have to relate to this question. I mean, like the museum audience is an active audience. The museum audience is not like the theater audience, and everything that we have done for this exhibition kind of works towards like kind of engaging more the audience into the experience of this project, this film, this installation. I had the opportunity to play with the lighting system that because of the tradition of the MAC to work also like into the field of theater, and the lighting system work as a sort of a third voice, third language that kind of goes around all the space, providing an even further engaging like a four-dimensional experience.